The war had ended, but the hatred had not. The HFY Empire had fallen, its noble houses stripped of their power, and its warriors either dead or in chains. High Lord Varkan, once a feared leader, now sat in disgrace, forced to negotiate with the very species he had sworn to exterminate. The humans had won, and he was expected to bow. But Varkan would rather spit in their faces than show submission. So he devised a cruel joke, one last insult to throw in their faces. In the Grand Human War Chamber, where high-ranking officers and diplomats discussed the rebuilding of occupied Shayari worlds, Varkan stood with an arrogant smirk. His piercing violet eyes swept across the room, filled with armored humans, their weapons always within reach. They did not trust him. Good. He did not trust them either. "I have a gift for your kind," Varkan announced, his voice smooth but dripping with contempt. He stepped aside, revealing the frail figure behind him. His daughter, Soraya. She sat in a hover chair, her once powerful warrior's body reduced to a broken shell. Her legs, once swift as lightning, were gone. The battle that had crippled the HFY Empire had also crippled her. Now, she was useless, a shadow of the fierce warrior she once was. Her golden skin had lost its glow, her silver-white hair dull, and her eyes, once filled with fire, were hollow. She did not look up. She did not need to. She knew what this was. Varkan sneered as he spoke. "I offer my daughter's hand in marriage, to a human." The words were laced with venom, designed to humiliate both her and whatever unfortunate creature accepted. A HFY noblewoman, a former warrior, reduced to a war prize. He expected laughter, rejection, perhaps even disgust. Silence filled the room. Then a voice broke it. "I accept." All eyes turned to the speaker, a human medic, dressed in the standard deep blue uniform of the Coalition Medical Corps. Dr. Ethan Carter. Varkan stared at him, expecting hesitation, amusement, anything that would confirm this was a joke. Instead, Ethan's face was calm, determined. Soraya finally looked up, her glowing blue eyes meeting his for the first time. She searched for mockery in his expression, but found none. Only quiet resolve. "You accept," Varkan scoffed, shaking his head. "Do you even know what you're saying, human?" Ethan took a step forward, his voice firm. "If she wants this, then yes." Soraya felt a sharp sting in her chest. This was supposed to be a humiliation, a final spit in the face of the victors. But this human was not playing along. He wasn't treating her like a trophy or a burden. He was treating her like a person. Varkan barked a laugh. "Then take her." His tone was mocking, but there was something else in his eyes, something unsettled. He had expected rejection. He had expected her to be tossed aside. But this human had accepted her without hesitation, without conditions. And that was dangerous. The ceremony was nothing grand. No lavish feasts, no rituals of honor. Just a simple contract, a witness, and a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. Soraya didn't speak a word as she was escorted out of the chamber, Ethan walking beside her. She refused to let herself feel anything. She was not grateful. She was not relieved. This was just another form of captivity. As they boarded the transport ship that would take them away from the ruins of her father's empire, she finally broke her silence. "Why did you do it?" Her voice was quiet but sharp. Ethan glanced at her as he adjusted his medical bag. "Because you deserved a choice." She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or lash out. "A choice? Is that what you call this?" "I call it a start." She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was naive, that he didn't understand what he had just agreed to. But instead, she said nothing. She simply turned away, staring out at the endless stars as the ship took off. She did not trust this human. She did not trust his kindness. But something in her gut told her this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The ship's engines hummed softly as it drifted through the cold void of space. Soraya sat motionless in the hover chair, her hands resting on her lap, her sharp nails lightly tapping against her skin. The silence between her and the human was unbearable. She had been trained in war, in battle strategy, in the art of killing, but not in this strange limbo where she had been stripped of everything. Ethan sat across from her, reviewing his medical notes on a small tablet. Occasionally, he glanced at her, but she refused to acknowledge him. The air smelled sterile, like the medbays of old Sayari warships. It reminded her of the days when she had been strong, when she had been feared. Now she was nothing. A war relic, a discarded tool. She finally broke the silence. "You think this is kindness?" Her voice was cold, controlled, marrying a crippled alien out of pity. Ethan didn't even look up. "I think it's survival." That made her frown. Survival. He set the tablet down and met her gaze. "Your father thought offering you was an insult. He expected me to say no. If I had, what do you think would have happened to you?" She stiffened but didn't respond. She knew exactly what would have happened. Once she had been the proud daughter of High Lord Varkan. Now she was just a burden, a reminder of his failure. He would have discarded her, thrown her to the lower ranks, left her to rot in the ruins of their fallen empire. Ethan continued, his tone even. "I didn't take you out of pity, Soraya. I took you because no one else would." She hated the way his words made sense, hated the fact that a human had saved her when her own kind would not. She turned away, staring out of the viewport. Stars blurred past in streaks of silver and blue. "You're a fool, human." He chuckled. "I've been called worse." She clenched her fists. She had spent her entire life believing that humans were weak, that they were inferior to the Sayari. And yet, here she was, in their custody, in their hands. The ship's automated voice crackled through the speakers. "Approaching medical station. Docking in 5 minutes." Ethan stood, stretching slightly. "Once we land, I'll run a full diagnostic on your condition. Your legs." "My legs are gone." Her voice was sharp, like a blade slicing through the air. He didn't flinch, "and I intend to change that." She blinked. "What?" Ethan tapped his wrist console, and a holographic display flickered to life. Blueprints of cybernetic enhancements, nerve regeneration treatments, advanced prosthetics, human technology, far beyond anything that Sayari had ever created. "I specialize in reconstructive medicine," he said. "Your people have always relied on genetic perfection. But we humans, we adapt. I can give you new legs." Soraya's heart pounded. She had resigned herself to this existence. She had convinced herself that she would never walk again. And now, this human was offering her something she had thought impossible. But why? "What do you get out of this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I just don't like seeing warriors broken." She stared at him, searching for deception, but all she found was quiet sincerity. The ship jolted slightly as it docked at the medical station. Ethan turned toward the exit. "Stay here. I'll handle the transfer paperwork." Soraya watched him go, her mind a storm of confusion. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust any of this. But for the first time since she had lost everything, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Soraya sat on the cold metal examination table, her fingers gripping the edges as if holding on to something solid would stop the storm raging inside her. The bright lights of the medical bay made everything feel too sterile, too controlled, too much like a place where she had no power. Ethan stood beside a large holographic display, reviewing scans of what remained of her legs. His brow was furrowed, deep in thought. His hands moved with practiced precision as he swiped through different models of prosthetic limbs, adjusting settings, making calculations. She hated this. She hated sitting there, waiting for a human to decide her fate. She hated feeling weak, feeling helpless. But most of all, she hated the flicker of hope he had placed inside her. It was dangerous. Hope was a fragile thing, and she had lost too much to believe in it again. "Your nerve endings are still intact." Ethan finally said, his voice steady, professional. That's good. It means we can integrate the prosthetics directly into your nervous system. You won't just walk. You'll feel them like real legs. Soraya narrowed her eyes. Your kind is capable of such things. Ethan smirked, not even looking at her. My kind is capable of surviving against an empire that thought we were insects. He turned to face her, arms crossed. Do you really think we wouldn't push the limits of science to make sure we stayed in the fight? She had no answer to that. Her people had always mocked humans for their lack of genetic perfection. The Sayari believed in strength through birthright, in the superiority of their natural forms. And yet, here was proof that humans had found a way to defy even the limitations of their own bodies. She hesitated before speaking. How long? Ethan leaned against the counter, considering. A few weeks for the surgery and initial nerve adaptation. Another month or two of physical therapy. Her stomach twisted. That long. She had imagined something instant, something painless. But of course, nothing ever came without a price. He must have seen the hesitation on her face because his expression softened. It won't be easy, Soraya. Learning to walk again never is. But I promise you, it's possible. She looked down at her useless legs, the remains of a warrior who had once stood tall, commanding armies, feared across the stars. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner, a discarded daughter, a lost cause. Could she truly believe that she would stand again? She clenched her fists. I will do it, she said, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. Ethan nodded as if he had expected that answer all along. Good. Then let's get started. The procedure began the next day. Soraya had faced torture before. She had endured wounds on the battlefield, the sting of broken bones, the searing pain of plasma burns, but nothing compared to the fire that spread through her nerves when the prosthetics were fused to her body. Ethan was there through all of it. He didn't leave her side, even when she cursed him, even when she lashed out, even when she thought she might die from the pain. Her body trembled as the implants connected, sending electric shocks through her system. Every nerve in her lower body screamed as her mind tried to reject the foreign limbs. Her body fought it, rejecting the unfamiliar sensation of something being part of her that was not her own flesh. And yet, the moment she moved her toes, metal toes, but hers nonetheless, something inside her shifted. She gasped, staring down at them, at the mechanical limbs that responded to her every thought. Ethan smiled. Told you. But this was only the beginning. Standing was a different kind of battle. Her first attempt sent her crashing onto the floor, her body unable to balance itself. Ethan caught her before she could hit her head, steadying her with firm hands. She shoved him away. Don't touch me. He only chuckled, stepping back. Then get up on your own. Rage burned through her veins, and she gritted her teeth. Again, she tried. Again, she failed. But she refused to stop. Days turned into weeks, and with every grueling hour of training, she fought harder. Ethan pushed her, never letting her wallow in self-pity, never allowing her to surrender to the frustration. He was relentless, forcing her to move, to balance, to take control of her body again. Until finally, she took her first step, her breath hitched, her heart pounding. The ground beneath her feet, metal or not, felt solid, real. She was standing again. She was walking. And for the first time in so long, she felt like herself again. Soraya's fingers tightened around the hilt of the training blade, her breath steady, her stance firm. The mechanical limbs attached to her body no longer felt foreign. They moved as she commanded, responding as if they had always been a part of her. The days of struggling to stand were behind her. Now she was preparing for something greater, vengeance. Ethan stood across from her, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. You've come a long way, princess, he said. But are you ready for the real fight? Soraya's eyes darkened. I was born ready. She lunged, her blade slicing through the air. Ethan dodged, sidestepping with ease, but she had anticipated that. Her new legs allowed her to pivot at unnatural speeds, shifting direction faster than any normal Chayari warrior. She brought her blade up in a swift arc, aiming for his side. Ethan barely managed to block, the force of the impact sending him sliding back. He let out a low whistle. Not bad. She didn't give him a chance to recover. Twisting her body, she delivered a brutal kick to his chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. He coughed, shaking his head as he propped himself up on his elbows. "All right," he muttered, wiping a bit of blood from his lip. "Now you're just showing off." Soraya loomed over him, blade pointed at his throat. "If you were my real enemy, you'd be dead." Ethan chuckled, raising his hands in surrender. "Good thing I'm not, then." She stepped back, lowering her weapon. The training session had served its purpose. She was stronger now, faster, more precise. The fire inside her burned hotter than ever. Her father had thrown her away, had mocked her, had believed her to be weak. He had gifted her to a human as a joke, thinking she would never rise again. He had made a mistake, and now she would make him pay. Ethan studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" Soraya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ethan sighed, standing up and dusting himself off. "Revenge won't bring back what you lost, Soraya." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't just revenge," she said. "This is justice." Ethan didn't argue. He knew better than to try. Instead, he motioned toward the hangar. "Then let's go get your justice." The journey back to the Xayari homeworld was not a quiet one. The closer they got, the more Soraya's rage simmered beneath the surface. Every memory of her father's betrayal played in her mind like a never-ending loop. The way he had humiliated her, the way he had discarded her like worthless scrap. She would remind him who she was. They landed under the cover of darkness. The city's towering spires cast long shadows, the neon glow of alien technology illuminating the streets below. Xayari soldiers patrolled the palace entrance, their weapons gleaming under the artificial lights. Soraya moved like a ghost, slipping past the guards with ease. Her body was lighter now, her movements unhindered by the weight of weakness. She had been born into royalty, trained to be a warrior, but now she was something more, something unstoppable. Ethan followed close behind, keeping watch as she advanced toward the throne room. "This is a suicide mission," he whispered. Soraya smirked. "Not for me." The doors to the throne room loomed ahead, massive and imposing. Her heart pounded as she pushed them open. Stepping inside, her father sat upon his throne, surrounded by his council, his piercing gaze locked onto her, his expression unreadable. "Soraya," he said, his voice cold, "I thought you were dead." She took another step forward, lifting her chin. "You thought wrong." The council murmured in shock, their whispers filling the grand chamber. Her father remained still, his golden eyes studying her. "And what is it you want?" he asked. Soraya's grip on her blade tightened. "I want you to pay for what you did to me." A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "And how do you intend to do that, my broken daughter?" She moved before he could blink. In a flash, she was upon him, her blade slicing through the air. He barely had time to raise his own weapon before steel clashed against steel, the force of the impact shaking the very foundation of the throne room. Her father was strong. He had always been strong, but he was not stronger than her. Not anymore. The battle raged, their blades clashing in a deadly dance. The council scattered, watching in horror as father and daughter fought like bitter enemies. Soraya's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. Every strike she delivered was precise, calculated. She was faster now, her body enhanced beyond anything her father could have imagined. He was losing. And he knew it. With one final devastating strike, Soraya knocked his blade from his hands. He stumbled back, his chest rising and falling with exertion. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. She pressed the tip of her blade against his throat. "You called me weak," she whispered. "You threw me away." His jaw clenched, and yet, here you stand. She should have ended it right then. She had every right, every reason. But she didn't. She stepped back, lowering her blade. "You are not worth my vengeance." Her father's expression twisted with something that looked like shame. Soraya turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him kneeling on the throne room floor, broken and defeated. Ethan met her at the entrance, his expression unreadable. "You didn't kill him." She shook her head. "No." "Why?" She exhaled, her grip on her blade loosening. "Because I am not him." The battlefield stretched before her like a storm waiting to break. The sky above was painted in shades of fire and smoke, the scent of war thick in the air. Soraya stood at the edge, her mechanical limbs humming with quiet power, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her blade. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. Ethan stood beside her, adjusting the settings on his rifle. "Once we cross that ridge, there's no turning back," he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear the weight behind it. The concern, the warning. Soraya didn't waver. "I was never planning to turn back." The Sayari Empire had underestimated her. They had mocked her, discarded her, thought her broken and useless. Now she would remind them who she was. Not just the daughter of a king, not just a discarded warrior. She was reborn, stronger, unstoppable. Their forces were small, humans, and defected Sayari, who had seen the corruption of the Empire firsthand. Against them stood an army of thousands, trained and bred for war. The odds were impossible. And yet, Soraya smiled. "Let's move," she ordered. They advanced through the rubble, the remnants of a once great city lying in ruins around them. The Empire had turned their home into a graveyard. Now, they would reap what they had sown. As they neared the enemy stronghold, alarms blared through the night, signaling their arrival. Bright searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over them. The ground trembled beneath their feet as war machines roared to life, towering mechanical beasts ready to crush them underfoot. The first shots rang out. Soraya ducked as energy blasts streaked past her, searing the air. She moved like a shadow, her mechanical legs propelling her forward with inhuman speed. She leaped, landing atop one of the Tayari war machines, plunging her blade deep into its control core. Sparks erupted as the machine convulsed and collapsed, its massive frame crashing to the ground. Ethan and the others pushed forward, gunfire and explosions lighting up the battlefield. The Empire's forces swarmed them, a sea of soldiers clad in black armor, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Soraya fought like a demon unleashed. Her blade sliced through the enemy ranks with lethal precision, her new body moving faster than they could react. She weaved through their defenses, striking with the fury of a storm. But they were many, too many. A blast struck the ground near her, sending her tumbling. She rolled to her feet, only to find herself surrounded. Sayari soldiers closed in, their weapons aimed at her chest. One of them stepped forward, her father's most loyal general, his golden eyes burning with hatred. "You should have stayed dead, princess," he sneered. Soraya smirked, blood dripping from a cut on her brow. "Funny," she said. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." The general lunged. She met him head-on, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. He was skilled, fast, deadly. But he was still fighting the girl he had known before. The girl who had once struggled to stand. She wasn't that girl anymore. She dodged his next strike with ease, countering with a brutal slash across his chest. He staggered back, his face twisted in shock. Before he could recover, she drove her blade through his heart. He gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "You were supposed to be weak." Soraya pulled her blade free, letting his body fall to the ground. "You should have never believed that." The battlefield was chaos. Ethan was holding his ground, but their forces were dwindling. They were losing. Soraya's gaze snapped toward the enemy fortress. It loomed in the distance, the heart of the Empire's power. If they could take it, they could end this war. She didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, she tore through the battlefield, cutting down anyone who stood in her way. She reached the fortress gates and slammed her hand against the control panel, overriding the system. The doors groaned open. Ethan's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Soraya, what are you doing?" "Ending this." She sprinted inside. The throne room was just as she remembered, grand, imposing. And at its center, her father stood, waiting for her. He wasn't surprised to see her. He had known she would come. "You think this ends with my death?" he asked, his voice calm. Soraya's grip on her blade tightened. "No," she said, "but it starts with it." He moved first. Their swords met in a deadly dance, father against daughter. The air crackled with energy as they fought, their strikes fueled by years of betrayal and resentment. Her father was strong, but she was stronger. She parried his final attack and drove her blade into his chest. He staggered, gasping as he fell to his knees. His golden eyes met hers, filled with something she couldn't quite name. Regret? Pride? It didn't matter. With one final thrust, she ended it. The war was over. She stepped out of the fortress as the Empire crumbled around her, the dawn breaking over the battlefield. Ethan was waiting. "It's done?" he asked. She nodded. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "So, what now?" Soraya looked at the rising sun, at the world before her. "Now," she said, "we rebuild." The air was still, carrying the scent of burning metal and earth, but the battlefield was silent. For the first time in years, there was no sound of war, no echoes of gunfire, no screams of the fallen. The Empire had crumbled, its last fortress now reduced to ruins, and with it, the reign of tyranny had come to an end. Soraya stood at the top of a broken tower, looking down at the world she had fought to free. The sky stretched endlessly before her, painted in shades of gold and crimson, as the sun began to rise. It felt strange. This quiet, this peace. She had spent so long fighting, so long surviving, that she had forgotten what it meant to simply exist without the weight of war pressing down on her. Ethan climbed up beside her, his uniform torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood. He let out a long breath and leaned against the broken wall, watching the sunrise with her. "It feels different," he said. Soraya nodded. "It does." The people they had saved, the ones who had fought by their side, were already gathering in the ruins of the city. There was no more empire, no more Shi'ari rule, only survivors, human and alien alike, who had to figure out what came next. Ethan turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. "You did it," he said softly. "You killed him." Soraya didn't answer right away. The image of her father's final moments was still burned into her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way his golden eyes had dimmed as he fell. She had expected to feel victorious, triumphant. Instead, there was only a hollow ache in her chest. "He was already dead long before I killed him," she said finally. His heart had turned to stone long ago. Ethan studied her, then reached out and took her hand, his warmth grounding her. "And you? What happens to you now?" She didn't know. For so long, her life had been defined by vengeance, by proving she was more than just a broken, discarded daughter. But now, there was no war to fight, no battle to win. The fire that had kept her going for so long had finally burned out, leaving only ashes behind. Before she could answer, a voice called out from below. "Soraya." It was Kale, one of the Tayari defectors who had fought with them. His armor was damaged, his face streaked with exhaustion, but there was a rare smile on his lips. "The people need you," he said. "They're waiting." Soraya's fingers tightened around Ethan's for a brief moment before she nodded. "Let's go." They climbed down from the tower, stepping into the heart of the ruined city where the survivors had gathered. Hundreds of eyes turned to her, a mix of humans and Shi'ari who had once been enemies, but now stood together as equals. There were no kings, no rulers, only those who had fought for freedom and survived to see the dawn. Kale stepped forward. They want to know what happens next. Soraya hesitated, feeling the weight of their gazes. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, that she was weak, that she was a disgrace to her people. And now, these same people were looking to her for guidance. She took a deep breath. "The empire is gone," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "The war is over. But that doesn't mean our fight is done." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People exchanged glances, waiting for her to continue. "For too long, we lived under the rule of those who believed power was more important than life," she said. "But we have a choice now. A chance to build something new. Not an empire, not a kingdom, but a home. A place where humans and Tayari can live as equals." Silence followed her words then, one by one. Heads nodded. People turned to each other, talking, discussing. Hope flickered in their eyes, cautious but real. Kale stepped forward again, his expression serious. "And who will lead us?" Soraya froze. She had not expected that. She had never wanted to lead, never thought of herself as someone who could. She had been a soldier, a warrior, a survivor. But a leader. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Then she looked at Ethan. He gave her a small smile, as if he already knew what she was thinking. "You don't have to do this alone," he murmured. She took a deep breath. "If I lead," she said finally, "then it won't be as a ruler. There will be no thrones, no crowns, only a council of those who have fought for this future, who will build it together." Another silence followed. Then, slowly, a sound rose from the crowd. Cheers, voices lifted in agreement. Soraya felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something more. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light over the ruins of the old world, she knew this was the beginning of something new. A new life, a new world.